Thanks for tuning in to more college football talk on the OFN Today as we talk SEC football with my former co-host, Mitch Light from theathletic.com, editor now at The Athletic. Nice gig. Good going, Mitch.
Thank you, Greg. Moved over here from after a long run at Athlon Sports.
Right.
Now one of the editors on the college football team here at the Athletic, and going well. And looking forward, as everyone is, to the upcoming season. Hopefully, it'll be as normal as possible.
Can't wait. Yeah, that's why last year it was just impossible for me to. I mean, because we had did shows for a couple of years, and then you changed your positions, and it was like, well, I don't have like a full-time co-host, and this whole season it's just a mess right now. And I just kind of took off college football from programming last year, but I'm so pumped to be finally, and we're only 24 hours away from kicking it off, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Not the biggest games. You never get the biggest games to start the season, but who cares? It's college football.
Yeah, it's there's enough. We got a conference game. We got Illinois and Nebraska.
Yeah.
So
we get to find out if Scott Frost is going to keep his job or not.
Yeah, big game.
Yeah.
Obviously. I would advise him not to lose that game.
No, that could be it. All right, so let's talk SEC football, Mitch, and we'll definitely start at the top with the defending champs, Alabama, but no Mac Jones, no Damian Harris, the Heisman winner's gone. They always look. We talk about this a lot, and guys leave, and then superstars come from all other parts of the country, and they become household names in a couple of years. Problem is, I think they're at that year where I'm not so sure that it's going to be unlike other years where they'll be successful, but this is not going to be one of their better teams because they still have some key players that they're going to have to replace, and they're going to have to rely on some players that have never played in big-time games before, including their new 5-star quarterback.
Yeah, it's all relative when you're talking about Alabama. Basically, it's never a talent issue. It's always sort of an experience issue. They've always got the talent, and the reasons to be, again, all relative, but the reasons for concern would be a first-time starter quarterback, and it's Bryce Young, 5-star quarterback from Southern California, who people say, we haven't seen him play yet. People say will be the most athletic of the Nick Saban quarterbacks. And, they lost an all-time great set of wide receivers. I mean, that group might go down as the best ever as far as their playmaking. And, obviously Devontae Smith, the Heisman winner, and they lose their leading rusher. And they lose some guys on the offensive line, some mainstays there. So, offensively, it was probably the best Nick Saban offense we've seen. So, sure, there's a little bit of concerns there. But I still think they're the overwhelming favorite to win the West. Bryce Young is going to be the guy to watch there. I mean, again, first-time starter. We've seen first-time starters under Nick Saban. Obviously, they all do well. It's just which degrees, how well will he, how good will he be? And I have little doubt he'll be very productive, very exciting to watch. Again, a different kind of Nick Saban quarterback, maybe.
And this is actually going to be, I think, which will help him out with the transition on offense, the better defense that Alabama's had probably in 4 or 5 years, because that has actually been a part of the program that has slipped. There's no question about it. The last few years, they've been, I'm not going to say, an old school Big 12 kind of program, but it's been about their offense being just so much better than everybody else that even if they give up 28, 35 points, it doesn't matter. They still win by 30.
Yeah, they went from having like all-time great defenses to, statistically, if you look at their yards per play allowed from about the early 2000s to the mid to late 2000s to now just being good on defense. Like you said, they weren't bad.
No.
They were total defense. They were third in the SEC, 32nd nationally. More than good enough with the way they score points to win games. And, they're on the field for more plays now because their offense is running at a faster pace and all that stuff. So I would tend to think their defense will probably be a little bit better than it was last year. And like you said, it just kind of balances out an offense that might not be as good.
Okay. And by the way, they will start with a good matchup against Miami. It's look, anytime Alabama plays in these big games, they're never very close, even though, it's nice to see that they play like a marquee type team early on. but we'll see. I mean, it's a freshman quarterback playing in his first game. De'Aaron King had a fantastic year last year. Miami's lost some key players, though. I'm sure it's going to be a blowout, but it's still a nice game to watch. And then Alabama's on the road at Florida and Texas A&M. So the schedule is definitely tougher while their offense is not as good. So that's another reason why I said I think that they will come down a little bit.
Yeah, Texas A&M is the game to watch,
Yeah.
I think. I think most people have them picked second in the West.
Yep.
It was a top 5, top 6 team, and that place is going to be at a fever pitch. So yeah, again, there's this. I think they're the preseason number 1 team in the country. I understand if people want to pick Georgia or someone else or Clemson, Ohio State. But Alabama's so good. We're kind of like searching for reasons why they might not win rather than just looking at them in the big picture.
Well, it's interesting because you bring up Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama, and they all have the same thing in common. They've all lost their quarterbacks. So if you do that, then, well, of course you're sticking with Alabama. It's not like even in this Texas A&M situation, we can kind of segue there. If A&M had Mond back, wait a second. Maybe they've got Alabama this year. But they're in the same boat. They have a 4-star quarterback, Haynes King, who's going to make his first start. Well, he'll make his first start before he plays Alabama, but they have an easier road playing Colorado, Kent State, and New Mexico by the time they play Alabama on October 9th.
Yeah, and, Alabama, if you want to say they picked a good year to have a new starting quarterback because the teams that they're going to be competing against for the most part all have, except for Georgia, all have new starting quarterbacks. I know they're very excited about Haynes King, dual threat guy from Texas there. They just keep recruiting at such a high level, and it's their 2022 class is strong. They ended 2021 really strong. The thing about Texas A&M, are they good enough on the offensive line? I'm talking about like to win a national championship. They're a top 10 team. Are they good enough on the offensive line, and do they have enough at the wide receiver position? They're very good at tight end. They're very good in the backfield. I don't know that they have those guys that truly scare you at wide receiver.
And then with an inexperienced quarterback, that puts you potentially in a situation where you're one-dimensional. And how is that going to work out? But they have a very good defense. That's going to be the calling card for that team. They have one of the better defenses in college football. And if they're going to upset Alabama and put themselves in a position to be a national championship contender, then that defense is going to have to prove how good they are against a freshman quarterback.
Yeah, and Mike Elko is really good defensive coordinator. That was a big hire for Jimbo when he got the job. He was at Notre Dame. Elko was, and they paid him a lot of money. I'm looking at their scores last year. They gave up 52 to Alabama and 38 to Florida. But for the most part, before that, they were holding teams in 20 points or less. And with modern day football, when you can do that, you're in good shape there. So they've got a lot of guys back, tons of experience in the back end and the front seven too. So yeah, there's a lot to like about this A&M defense.
Yeah, it's too bad that they don't really have a big non-conference opponent, which is why they just can't afford to lose that Alabama game. Because you lose the Alabama game, and because there's still only 4 teams in the postseason, you're just not getting to the playoffs. You're just not. So,
right, because Alabama would have to lose twice for them to win the West to have that opportunity to pick up a big win against Georgia or whoever wins the East.
Yep. So, well, that's still a month or so away. So we'll see how that goes. We'll have a few games under the belt with these freshman quarterbacks. LSU. So, how surprised were you that LSU played as poorly as they did last year? As great, we knew there were going to be changes because everybody left, but wasn't it kind of surprising that they just fell off completely? Even though they were 5-5, it felt like they were 3-7.
Yeah, they were a bad 5-5 because the shocking game was Mississippi State, and I know Mike Leach was new to the SEC, but his offenses have been around forever. People can scout.
Yeah.
They can scout Washington State, Texas Tech. It wasn't like no one had ever seen him in college football, and that's why you see that Bo Pelini was out of a job after the end of the year. No one could have envisioned the defensive drop-off that we saw last year. Now, they had some injuries. We get all that, but this is LSU. They recruit not necessarily at the Alabama level or the Ohio State level, but just a tick below that. So they have tons of really good players. So I expect a bounce back. I don't. I would pick them third in the West, a strong third in the West. But I think A&M and Alabama are clearly better than them. They've got a new quarterback. Max Johnson played some at the end of the last year. Miles Brennan was one of the more notable quarterback injuries in the preseason camp. Or I forgot when he got hurt, but Max Johnson has been named the starter there. They've got really good guys in the secondary. It's a big year for Ed Orgeron. Is he going to get fired? No, he's not going to get fired. He won a national championship 2 years ago. But for all the naysayers that he silenced by winning the national championship, they all came back out last year, and rightfully so. To go from a national championship team to a 5-5 and having a almost historically bad defense, you open yourself up for criticism. So I think there's a lot of pressure on this team. You'd think they'll play with a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, and Derek Stingley is one of the top corners. He's probably a first-round draft pick when he comes out.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing is, and it shows you how important, you just mentioned Elko, shows you how important when you lose someone like Dave Aranda. Didn't realize it was going to be that big of a drop-off, though. But wow, I guess they really missed him. And that's why it's going to be big this year to find out, did they miss him that much? Was he masking a lot of issues, even though mostly new players? But you would think things would be a lot better. They're just too talented.
Yeah. And that was sort of, that's another reason that Coach O opened himself up to criticism, because he was, publicly and privately, he didn't seem to care that Dave Aranda left. He was saying all the things in the preseason last year. Oh, we're going to do more of the things that I want to do, and sort of like they let Aranda do his own thing as like the defensive head coach, so to speak, and then you come out and you play that poorly on defense. So it is, it's on him to get the coaching right, no doubt about it.
All right, Auburn. So you gotta be infatuated with Tank Bigsby. He's a good one. Brian Matthews, who covers Auburn, interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and he thinks he's going to be one of the better running backs that the program's had. So there's a lot of hope there. But they bring in the new head coach, the Boise head coach, and there's a lot of question about whether or not this was the right hire, especially when you get a guy from the far west and then you bring him to the southeast. It's always like a little bit of, does he know the area? Okay, wow, he coached here for a year in the area. Does he really, there's a lot of recruiting. I like the hires and Bobo and Mason. That should really help him out. But Bo Nix, boy, that's been a wasted quarterback. He just had so many expectations. When he was out there, I remember as a freshman, it was like, wow, just imagine how good he's going to be in 2 or 3 years. It just never materialized.
Yeah, totally. He's a guy, I think as the college football, now he's a five-star quarterback, so I don't want to overstate this, but I think what happens to a lot of us, the college football media and fans, is when we see a freshman quarterback, a true freshman, be competent, we fall in love with him, thinking that he's going to take these big leaps every year, and it always isn't the case. And this it has not been the case with Bo Nix. Again, it's a little surprising because he came in with so much fanfare, but he has not been great last year. 12 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's a crazy athlete. He'll do some things that wow you on the field. So I'll be interested to see Mike Bobo, who was at South Carolina last year, has SEC roots at Georgia, likes to run the ball, use tight ends. Let's see what kind of offense they have there, because they're not really skilled. Well, I wouldn't say they're not skilled. They're not experienced at the wide receiver position there. And I'm interested to see Derek Mason on defense. After a 7-year run at Vanderbilt as the head coach, he obviously made his name as the defensive coordinator at Stanford, and basically made his big name stopping Oregon's spread, the Chip Kelly spread offense. The game has evolved a lot since then, but he's obviously will have better personnel than he did at Vanderbilt there. So they're a team that I think is a high floor, low ceiling team. If you tell me Auburn's 5-7, well, 5-7 is probably too, maybe 6-6. I'm not shocked. If you tell me they go 9-3 or 10-2, I'm not shocked either. I think they're one of the mystery teams, not just in the SEC but nationally.
Did you like the hire? Harsin hire.
Harsin, yeah, I did. I've got no problem. If you think a guy's a good head coach, he'll adjust to the Southeastern Conference. He'll adjust.
You're
He's,
right.
I'm not always hire the guy because he knows the area. Like, so he'll know the area. He'll get in his car and he'll drive to all the high schools.
Yeah.
He'll get to know coaches. So I think you go out and hire the best guy, and he's been a successful coach now. He took over a very successful program. I don't have his record right in front of me. I think they had a little bit of a dip, but then they were kind of trending back up. They were very
Yes,
good
they
the
were.
last couple of years. So yes, I did like the hire.
All right. Also in that division, we'll stick in that division first, at the West, and take a look at the other three teams in the West, and they all have. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. They all have second-year head coaches. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Mike Leach at Mississippi State, and Pittman at Arkansas. Starting with Ole Miss, there were some nice things to see out of Ole Miss last year with Kiffin. Now there's a lot more expectation because Corral played well, and I think there's got to be that next step. He's got to now perform how good can he be? Let's answer that question first. Do you think he's got the capability of being a pro quarterback?
Yeah, I think he's fantastic. Now he plays in a great system for clearly a great offensive head coach. He makes some, he's kind of the gunslinger. He made some mistakes and 6 interceptions at Arkansas. He might have had 6 interceptions in another game too. But beat out John Reese Plumlee, a guy who was a great athlete, who was basically the incumbent starter, and did a lot of good things. And he's, rushed for 500 yards last year. I'm a big fan of this team offensively. They're very good and very deep in the backfield. They've got some playmakers in the wide receiver. Just can they stop enough people? Can they do enough defensively to be a threat? They're if they can make just moderate improvements defensively, they can be. I'm not going to say they're going to win the West, but they're a team that I think could win 9-10 games.
Yeah, next year is probably the year that if he.
Well, I don't think Corral will be back. So
really, you think he'll be gone next year? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, Lane Kiffin's a good offensive coach. They're going to have good quarterback play. I can't sit here and tell you who it is right now, but they'll get good quarterback play.
You know what's great about as a fan, it's really nice in both basketball and football, this rule, this extra eligibility rule, this extra year, because it gives kids the opportunity to kind of stay in college, and a lot of them have decided to, a majority of them stay, and it just makes the teams better. It's better for basketball and football that there's more veteran talent. And I don't know how long that lasts. I don't know if it's just like a 1-year kind of thing. But I hope it lasts at least a few years because I think it's good for the sport.
Yeah, if you look at the returning production in college football compared to most normal years, this year every team has, not every team, but the leaders.
Yeah.
There's just so many more teams with so much more returning
I know.
Yeah, and we're going to see it in basketball too. We're going to see it in basketball as well. So yeah, I get. Yeah, it's cool. It's given. Coaches love it, but it's also given coaches some headaches as far as roster management and all that stuff. But they'll figure it out.
And I brought it up because Corral's like a sophomore, but he's really like more of a junior, which is why I brought that up. Because normally, if he was like a true sophomore, then he's playing another year. Okay, Mississippi State, Mike Leach. And what do you think? First of all, quarterback. Jack Abraham comes over from Southern Miss. Will Rogers is there. Has he named a starter yet?
No, I think from what I read, I think it's going to be Will Rogers. Yeah, they had an interesting team last year that they get out of the gates 44-34, the CBS game at LSU. Yeah. It looks like, Leach has adapted to the SEC. He's going to he's going to light up that league.
JJ Costello had 6 touchdown passes.
14 points at Arkansas, 2 at Kentucky, 14 to A&M, 0 Alabama, 24 Vanderbilt, 24 Georgia. Yeah, they didn't, but they ended the year nice, underrated win against Missouri, and then they won their controversial bowl game, if you remember that. But this seems like a good spot for a Mike Leach team because no one's talking about them. Because they were probably not as good as expected. But if you look at Mike Leach's tenure, it takes him. That's why the LSU game was so surprising last year. It usually takes him a while. They say his offense is simple, and I guess it is, but it involves a lot of reps, a lot of practice reps. So I think the fact that they have an off season, which they didn't have last year, spring practice, summer, that they'll be good. How good is this? A 6-6 team? They live in the high rent district of the SEC West, so that's what makes this league fun. It's what makes the West fun. You can be a really, really good team and go 2-6 in your division.
And by the way, Mike Leach is one of those coaches you were just talking about. He seems to go anywhere. Go in the West, he'll go
right,
the Midwest, in the South. I'll go anywhere, and he'll win anywhere. So Arkansas, I like what they're doing. I like, Pittman all of a sudden. I mean, he really kind of grew on me. And, immediately when you heard the hire, you're like, what is that about? But I just think they found the right coach for Arkansas. They're going to have a really good defense. I mean, how can you not love the name Bumper Pool? I love that Texas matchup in week 2. I think that game could be a close game. I think that could be a very interesting game.
Yeah, and Pittman, you're right. I mean, everyone nationally was like, obviously down here, especially in SEC country, we knew who he was, one of the most respected offensive line coaches. But you're like, is this guy going to be a head coach? And I always say, all of us, fans, media, we can sit there and put together a list of coaches, like the hot names. I can go to Wikipedia. I can see college CFB stats and look up at stats and tell you how good this guy's resume is. Yeah. But athletic directors and school presidents get paid the money because they're the ones that go interview the guy. They sit in a hotel suite in 4 hours and interview the guy.
Right.
And Sam Pittman kind of has that it factor where that Arkansas fell in love with him. Now, was he their first choice? No, he wasn't. And I know people who work over at Arkansas and just say that this guy is the real deal. Now, they got a new quarterback, probably going to be, I guess it's going to be KJ Jefferson after they're one and done with Felipe Franks, but they got a ton of starters back. Now, they were clearly a much better team last year, even though they only won 3 games. They lost the controversial game with the no fumble call or whatever it was to Auburn by 2. They lost to 11 to A&M. Florida beat them badly, but then 3 to LSU, 2 to Missouri. So this was a very, very competitive team. So will they be better from a win-loss record this year? I don't know, but I think it's important for them to be a really competitive team to keep that trajectory up, even if they go 4-8 or 5-7.
Oh, they'll be patient. Yeah.
Yeah. If you just show that they're going to be competitive week in and week out, I think it's a great sign.
It's interesting because you bring up Arkansas, LSU, and yet LSU had the better record, and you felt Arkansas had a better year.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Basically, if you're a fan, you were happier as an Arkansas fan last year than an LSU fan. It's all based on expectations.
Yep. And so again, that's why I like that Texas matchup, because that could be the entire season. You're really thinking about it for Arkansas and whether or not they can actually surprise everybody. Okay, let's move on to the East, and it looks like once again it's all about Georgia and Florida. This is a broken record. JT Daniels will be a full-time starter if he can stay healthy. So, how sold are you on JT Daniels as a quarterback that can lead a team to an SEC championship, national championship situation?
Pretty, I think he's a really, really good quarterback. And, reading a lot about him and talking to our Georgia writer, and, this is not a guy who is, football is very important to him. He is a film junkie and, wants to be really, really good. I know you can say that about a lot of guys, but I think this is kind of a perfect storm offensively for them. I know they've had some injuries, but I think they're going to be dynamite on offense. They're on paper, obviously, the clear-cut number 1 team in the league. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think they can win a national championship.
Well, again, that's why I asked you about Daniels, because even though he's been around for a couple of years, we just really haven't seen JT Daniels at this level. And they're taking on Clemson. So there's your shot.
Yep.
If Georgia, who could afford to lose that game more? Georgia, right?
Well, there's different ways. Clemson's going to have the easier path in the ACC, so they'll more likely go undefeated. Georgia does not play Alabama. Their West is Auburn and Arkansas. So they have a relatively soft non-conference schedule. I don't really think it matters. I think both of them can afford a loss as long as they take care of business. Now, obviously, not all losses are created equally. You got to see how are you exposed in a loss. And I know it's only
Sure.
week 1 and you can come back, but if you're showing signs that that things aren't well on a certain unit or a certain side of the ball, that's obviously not a good sign. But I think either team can afford a loss and bounce back and still win a national
The only thing I'm a
championship.
little bit concerned with Georgia, and again, I know that they've been recruiting well since Smart's been there. They did lose 6 starters on defense, so a little bit concerned with that. But other than that,
Yep.
they're loaded talent wise. Just like again, they're behind Alabama, but they're right there now, and it's about time. I mean, 8-2 last year, and it seemed like a big disappointing season.
Yeah, I mean the Alabama game kind of was a reality check for a lot of their fans, and the Florida game was disappointing because they thought they had passed Florida on the food chain, and then Florida really handed it to them in Jacksonville.
And that segues us to Florida and Dan Mullen now in year 4, but he has a new quarterback, Emory Jones. So this is again a situation where you have a talented team that is coming off a good season. It definitely made progress. The win you talked about, they competed with Alabama in the SEC championship game, but now it's back to the drawing board with Emory Jones.
Yeah, and they're a talented team, but they're clearly, from a talent standpoint, not in Georgia's realm. Alabama, probably even LSU and A&M. That's the kind of the Dan Mullen conundrum. Great coach, no doubt about it. Like you said, they were as close to Alabama as anyone last year, but just not recruiting the way they should be at Florida. They're not recruiting poorly, but they're not recruiting at the level of the teams that they need to beat in the SEC. Emory Jones, a lot of people, there's questions about him. They seem to be confident that he's the guy. He's got a big arm. He's been very patient in an era when a lot of guys move on. He's in his 4th year in the program and has yet to start a game. So kind of applaud that patience there. They lose, 2 of the best weapons in the country in Kyle Pitts at tight end and Kadarius Toney, who had a great senior year. They're not great in the backfield. The guy to watch is DeMarcus Bowman, who's a freshman transfer, is a 5-star kid from Florida who went to Clemson and then transferred back there. They're good on the defensive line, but they don't have those, just the quality of guys, the volume of guys that you see at Alabama, Georgia. So my long-winded Florida answer is saying I love Dan Mullen. I think they've got good talent, but they don't have the talent necessary to win a national championship right now.
Yeah, it seems like when they lose like an edge rusher, whether it's a Grenard or a Zuniga, like a really talented big edge rusher, defensive lineman, that's it. They don't have that second, third, fourth, fifth wave of talent that Georgia and Alabama do. Is that a knock then on Dan Mullen overall? Is that his history as a recruiter?
Well, it's hard to say because he was at Mississippi State, and he recruited fine at Mississippi State. His teams were very good. I mean, look at the history of Mississippi State. He got, Dak Prescott was a great recruit, but he was kind of under the radar, a 3-star kid from Louisiana that LSU didn't offer until the very end there. So, his history as a recruiter at Florida is that they're not recruiting. Again, the recruiting classes last 4 years when he's 12th, 9th, 9th, 14th. That might sound fine. But Georgia's 4-1-2-1. Alabama's 1-2-1-5. LSU 3-4-5-15.
And you're in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. You're University of Florida. So I know that it's not all recruiting. Recruiting's very, 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 very important. Coaching is important. It's both. And they're recruiting well enough to be a really good team year in and year out, but they're not recruiting well enough to win a national title. And that's what they expect.
Okay, now the rest of the conference is just not a division. It's just, you got Kentucky. Mark Stoops continues to do a pretty good job there. Really good job there, actually.
Yes.
Wendell Robinson was an interesting transfer that he was able to pick up. Who's the quarterback?
Will Levis, transfer from Penn State, who they love. Huge arm, can throw the ball, really confident kid. Beat out Gatewood, the 4-star Auburn quarterback who left Auburn when Bo Nix won the job, and then Gatewood just left Kentucky after Will Levis was named the starter. So yeah, they got a new offensive coordinator. They brought in Liam Combs. Liam Robbins is a college basketball player. Liam Cohn is a NFL guy, going to run a different style offense than they've seen in Kentucky. They've been struggling on offense a lot because of injuries to the quarterback position. They've got good running backs. I really like Chris Rodriguez. They're very good on the offensive line. Mark Stoops has done a very, very good job building a program at Kentucky where in the past, school like Kentucky, you might kind of strike while the iron is hot, or things might come together in one year and then there's a fall off. But he's been consistent. I think it's one of the most well-respected programs and coaching staffs in the conference there. So I think, third or fourth, I haven't done official SEC picks. I don't, when I was an athlete, that's all I did. But I think I'd pick them third.
I wouldn't be surprised, especially if they get that quarterback play. And it's the defense, really. It's like year in and year out, they play good defense. So,
yeah, lost a ton this year though. They've got 3 or 4 starters back, so that's going to be an issue there. But they've been consistent on defense.
Missouri. Now this is a program that I have with Drinkwitz there. I feel good about, but I don't know where they are right now because it seems like every couple of weeks they kind of look good and it looks like they're ready to make the next step, and then they pull a dud for a week or two. But it's early in his coaching regime there. I just think it's going to take a little time, obviously, but I like the coaching move. I like what I see already, and I wouldn't be surprised if they shocked some people this year, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they were very inconsistent like last year.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think long term, I like what he's doing there. They're recruiting very well. They got a good quarterback coming in next year from Georgia. Connor Bazelak, their current quarterback, who did not win the job out of camp last year, but took over in the Tennessee game, I believe, is very, very good. They've got a good running back in Tyler Beatty. They don't have the great skill at the wide receiver position that they did earlier in their SEC tenure when they won the division 2 years in a row. So I like this team. I like this program. Thought it was a good hire. And I think they're right there with Kentucky right now. You go third or fourth in the East, and I think I'd pick that game is at Kentucky, I believe. I'm checking the schedule right now. It's at Kentucky in week 2. Talk about a huge swing game. So two programs that I know I'm in here in Tennessee that Tennessee fans don't really enjoy the fact that both those programs right now are better than I
can imagine. I could see Missouri knocking off Florida towards the end of the year.
Missouri, Missouri has a very good record against Florida. I think Florida won last year. It's 41-17 in the Swamp. But before that, I think since Missouri joined the SEC in 2012, they were like 5-2 against Florida or something like that, which is just crazy. Maybe it wasn't that good, but they've been very successful against Florida.
And then the last 3 teams all have first-year head coaches. Shane Beamer at South Carolina, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt. Which hire do you like the most?
Well, I'm gonna be a homer here and say I like the Clark Lee hire. Obviously, Vanderbilt's a very difficult job, but Clark Lee, defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, went to Vanderbilt, went to high school 2 miles away, grew up a Vanderbilt fan, knows the program very well. He's doing it. He's doing the right things. He's saying all the right things. He does not have the most talented team this year, but I think he's going to be a very good hire for Vanderbilt. Beamer, I like at South Carolina. He's going to be a good recruiter. He's off to a good start recruiting. The knock on him is that he's never been a head coach and he's never really been a coordinator. He's been a special teams coordinator, but he's been around some great coaches. Obviously his dad at Virginia Tech spent time at South Carolina under Steve Spurrier, Georgia under Kirby Smart, and Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley. So he's seen how it's done a lot of different ways, and that's kind of how he sold himself. And they're not the most talented team this year, but one thing they've got going for them is they're good on both lines of scrimmage, and that's a good place to start. Now, the quarterback position, Luke Doty got hurt, is out probably week 1 or 2, so they haven't named a starter yet there. They got a good running back. Kevin Harris surprisingly led the SEC in rushing last year, and they got a freshman, Marshawn Lloyd, who was their top recruit last year, tore his ACL. heard great things about him. So South Carolina would be my pick to surprise this year. If you told me there was one team that, went 4-4 out of these bottom three teams, if you one team that went 4-4 or, and kind of elbowed their way in the middle, that South Carolina would be my pick.
And then Tennessee, boy, it has been forever that Tennessee was one of those on par with Florida programs. Those years, it's just, how long has that been? 15 years?
Well, yeah, they had 1 year under Butch Jones where they won 8-9 games, and actually they came into Nashville, and had they beaten Vanderbilt, they might have gone to the Sugar Bowl or something. They were in position in New Year's Six, and Vanderbilt beat them, and then next year they went 0-8. Fell apart there. So they've had some peaks, but not nearly enough, and they've teased their fans so much, and they just lost so much to the transfer portal. Everyone lost guys at the transfer portal, but half the guys are usually second, third teamers. Tennessee lost some frontline players there, so they're at a talent disadvantage right now. Looks like Joe Milton hasn't been named the starter, but the Michigan transfer is going to be named the starter. They're not great at the skill because a lot of those guys transferred out. They don't have a ton on defense, so I think it's going to be a rough first year for Josh Heupel.
It's interesting because you look at those three jobs and those three new coaches, and you go, "Oh, look at Heupel. Look at all the winning he did at Central Florida." The other two guys, they have nothing. They've never been head coaches before, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. So.
Yeah, Heupel, was not the most popular around here. Seems like a good guy, and after dealing with Jeremy Pruitt, like the fact that he's just like a nice person, and people kind of are gravitating more towards Heupel. But it's kind of trending down at Central Florida. He had a great first year, not as good. And you go back, people point, he's an offensive coordinator at Missouri, put up big numbers. Well, I can't remember the exact year, but look at the year. They just ran up huge numbers against non-conference, like Eastern Michigan, an FCS team, against the good teams in the schedule. Didn't work as well there. So, I think they'll be more fun to watch because they weren't fun to watch. Jeremy Pruitt was trying to win an Alabama 2011 style with Tennessee 2020 players in the modern-day SEC. Wasn't going to cut it.
And if Josh Heupel fails at Tennessee, that is not – I don't know what that's going to say about the head coaches at Central Florida that leave. Because Scott Frost.
Yeah, that's right. That's two in a row. But we'll hopefully it works out for Heupel again. Seems like a great guy.
And I'd like to see it work for Scott Frost too. It probably won't, but I hope he could figure it out. So, Mitch, I appreciate it. Again, theathletic.com. You have your own show. What do you do besides your editing work?
Well, 95% of my job as an editor at The Athletic, work with our editorial team in the college football, work with a bunch of specific writers, but I'm also now co-host of a podcast you can find on theathletic.com or the app. It's called Stars Matter. It's a recruiting podcast with Ari Wasserman, our national recruiting writer. So we had our first edition last week, and it was a lot of fun there. So it's keeping me busy.
Thanks, Mitch. I look forward to reaching out to you at some point later in the year, maybe before the bowls and the playoffs and such. But I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you again.
Good catching up, Greg.